Well, good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. I'm Doug Harris, Director of the Education Research Alliance for New Orleans. We're an organization based in Tulane that provides objective, rigorous, and useful research on New Orleans schools, and sometimes have these public events to have conversations that touch on that research, but also handle some of the bigger picture policy conversations and discussions and issues that are facing the city. So 15 years ago, we had a terrible storm here. Just have the anniversary here next week, and that's one motivation for having this now is to commemorate that event, and it's something we've been planning on doing for a long time. We weren't planning on doing it in the context of another crisis, so here we are under COVID and a new crisis that certainly affects the schools as well, but in very different ways. So I'm very glad to be here with a great group of panelists, so I'm going to introduce in a minute. So we're gonna address a few different questions. One is how have the schools in New Orleans responded to the crisis so far, and starting off back in the spring and with what's happening right now. How do we think the switch to remote learning and COVID will affect schools in the long run? What lessons might we draw from the experience of Katrina? Seeing that this is the anniversary and seeing that we did learn a lot about schooling in a crisis, and whether there might be lessons from that. And any other topics the panelists want to bring up. So this will be an open-ended conversation. And you should feel free in the audience to post questions, and those are going to be kind of fed to me, and I'll see the questions coming in. I might not be able to get to all of them, but I'll try to work in some of those, especially towards the end of the conversation. I think we should go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists, who should start showing up on your screen here in just a second. So Griselda Alejandro Jackson is a mother, a businesswoman, a pastor's wife, and a member of the Orleans Parish School Board. Born in Puerto Rico, she has lived in New Orleans since the age of 8 and attended local public schools. She also helped start the Crocker Elementary School and became one of the first community organized charter schools in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Thanks, Griselda. Dr. Liz Marcel Williams is CEO and co-founder of the Center for Resilience, previously known as the New Orleans Therapeutic Day Program, which offers education, counseling, and medical services for children with behavioral disabilities. She's worked in New Orleans in education since 2002 and is an expert in using compassionate, trauma-informed approaches to help students with disabilities. Welcome, Liz. Dr. Derek White, Sr. is the new Director of Performance and Accountability for Landry High School. Louisiana native, Dr. White has worked for more than 20 years teaching in both high school and college classrooms. He is a principal. He was a principal of West St. Mary High School, where he was the Parish High School Principal of the Year in 2017 and 2018. Dr. White received his bachelor's degree from Southern University in Baton Rouge and his master's and doctorate degrees in education from the University of Louisiana at Monroe. Welcome, Derek. Jamar McNeely is CEO and co-founder of Inspire NOLA Charter School Network, which manages 8 charter schools in New Orleans. Mr. McNeely previously served as a teacher and assistant principal at Edna Carr High School, and then as principal of Alice Hart Charter School. He holds a bachelor's degree in finance from Southern University and a master's degree in educational administration from Louisiana State University. And Allison Moultrie is a parent leader at Our Voice Nuestra Voz. She's a native New Orleanian, a mother, a teacher. She has a 5th grade son who attends Capdow Charter School. She heads the history department at St. Aug High School, where she teaches 11th grade U.S. history. All right, so great group, different perspectives, different positions that all of you hold. So really appreciate your being here together. So just to start off with, I want to give everybody a chance to make some introductory comments, and also just comment on one jumping off point question, which is, back in the spring when this all started, what was your experience, back in the spring, and how the switch to remote learning and the larger elements of the crisis, how that played out. So, Griselda, do you want to start?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Back in the spring, in March, when we anticipated that the governor would issue a school closure everybody was awaiting it, but it came very suddenly. So we were all, you know, trying to figure out, okay, the school has to close right away. What do we do now? And as a board member, my constant communication was with our CEO, Joe Castro, from NOLA College Prep. I was on the NOLA College Prep board at that time. And keeping abreast of what the school was doing, making sure that our faculty was taken care of, that our administrators were on board, that the teams were working, beginning to survey how many kids actually could do distance learning from their homes, making thousands of packets for parents to pick up because they didn't have computers or hotspots in their homes. Jumping onto the virtual platforms. It was a lot of activity going on, and it was rushed, but the administration and the faculty all got on board. You have to be of one mind to be able to do this in a way that is effective and consistent, and that you can provide the best for your students. So it was, all hands on deck, just a lot of activity to get things going, to set things up, because we didn't know when, and we still don't know when this pandemic called COVID-19 is going to be done away with. So we're still in that mode of all hands on deck, getting to our students what they need, and doing the best that we can with these resources that we have available. But I have to say, I have to take my hat off to the administration and the faculty and the parents and the kids, because this was sudden. This is not like, okay, next month we're going to virtual. This is like Friday, okay, we're shutting down schools, and Monday we've got to think of a new way to do this.
Yeah, and doing something we've never done before.
Exactly.
Yeah. Derek, you want to go next?
Yes, sir. First of all, thank you all for having me. And it's a pleasure to be on this panel with such distinguished guests. But it's more of the same of what Ms. Jackson is saying. It happened so rapidly. But I have to, once again, as she stated, give kudos to our leadership team at Algiers Charter for being keen and sharp on what their expectations were. And from there, it was just a matter of folding out their plan that they had laid out for us moving forward. And it did take everyone, every staff member, whether it was making the copies, the paras, the discipline team, and then relaying that information to our parents. Because once again, while we're trying to prepare for education, all of us are preparing for this unknown pandemic. So it was not just a school thing, it was a village. We often hear people say about the village, but it really took all of us in order to get it to that point and try to continue to educate our kids.
How much was online, and how much did you rely on packets, and how did those things connect to each other?
For us, initially, everything, we made packages for everyone. Simply because, like Ms. Jackson stated, we wasn't sure what was the capability of all of our families initially. So after we've given out those packages, we was in a process of surveying our parents and students to see who had technology, who had internet access at home, so then we can begin transitioning over to Google Classroom and Zoom and things of that nature.
So when did that happen in your case? When would you say you transitioned more towards the online environment?
The first week we start surveying, and by the second week we start transitioning.
Gotcha. And then towards the end, say by mid-April, how much would you say was online? How much time were students spending online live with teachers?
At that particular time, we would say at least 45% of our student population, because what we did realize is the great divide that was there with technology. So no matter what we surveyed and planned and prepared, even what NOLA PS was provided, we still had some lack of technology where we had, teachers going to pick up lessons, parents mailing lessons, dropping lessons off at the school. So we were still having that connection as it relates to paper-based.
Gotcha. Interesting. All right. Thank you very much. Liz, so you're coming at this from a different perspective, different role, but an important one. The mental health side of this is quite significant. So, tell us about your experiences back in the spring.
Sure. So it definitely echoes what both Priscilla and Derek said in terms of needing to make a really rapid shift. Just so everyone is clear, the way that the Center for Resilience works is we serve children with significant behavioral health needs on site for full days. So we provide instructional services as well as all of the mental health and medication management support. So it's both the clinical and the instructional aspects. So we have a teaching team as well. We were prepared for the closure. We were anticipating it. Word came on a Friday. We had thought we probably had until the following Wednesday to get all of our plans in place. So it happened a little bit more quickly than we expected, but we had already started surveying our families around device access, internet access, those kinds of things. So we had a skeleton plan in place. And what we ended up doing when we needed to make the really quick pivot to closure was we took 1 week to regroup. So we, as a directors team, made sure that we had all of the background systems in place, that we had clear supports for our instructional staff so they knew how to make the moves to Google Classroom and then support that instruction with lots of packets, particularly for our younger students in kindergarten through third grade. We made sure that all of our operations were up and running. So because a lot of the families that we serve are under particular duress, we did door-to-door meal service delivery throughout the entire, actually through our summer school programming. So wanted to get all of that up and running, getting devices to families, and then making sure that all of our clinicians had the tools they needed to shift to virtual, group, and individual therapy, medication management, et cetera. So we took a week to give our staff a little time off to figure out all of the logistics around childcare, et cetera, that they were all facing, with some professional development meetings happening via Zoom. And then a week later went live fully virtual, and initially started our services with instructional office hours coupled with assignments and individual therapies. And then as the pandemic progressed, moved to having much more targeted direct instruction, small group and individual through appointments, and also moving to do both group and individual therapy and creating more opportunities via Zoom for our kids to work on relationship building activities and make connections with each other and just continue the healthy relationships. And then I would also say, I went through this as a parent. So I have a toddler who's in daycare, which shut down the same day that schools did. I'm the step parent to a middle schooler who attends a New Orleans public school. And so thinking about how did we at home make sure that our schedules were transitioning so we could provide support to the kids and make sure that we were still doing our jobs. So lots of transitions in a very short period of time.
So how does the online environment, my impression talking to like special education network experts, which is a little bit different, but what's your impression of how well the online version of that worked relative to how it was working before?
I mean, it's a mixed bag. I think we saw initially struggles with engagement, especially if we were trying to say, hey, we're available to support you in the meantime, complete these assignments. We got to a point where we realized we needed to make sure that each child, and we're a small program, we serve approximately 45 kids, each child had individual appointments and touch points that were scheduled throughout the week, and we saw a lot more engagement once that happened. But over time, both for clinical appointments and for instructional appointments, there's video fatigue. I know we all feel it. And so what we saw, like kind of a low engagement, high engagement, and then it kind of peaked off with a lot of like, yeah, I'm here, I'm present, my video's off, I'm not quite as fully engaged as I was initially. And we saw that both with our kids and with our families.
Were there any kids who you went to visit in person?
We did. Later in the pandemic, we are really lucky in that part of our work, we contract with Tulane University Medical School. So we have a psychiatrist who's on site 4 full days a week. He's also a pediatrician, and he has been our go-to in-house consultant on all things health-related during this time. It's been a really nice additional support. And so we had really clear protocols in place for our staff around doing some safety tips so we could do tech support that way, and also some counseling sessions.
Great. Interesting. Jamar, so how about your experience? Anything different from what you've heard here, or anything else you want to highlight differently?
First, thanks for having me a part of this panel. Definitely enlightened to have this conversation. A lot of the same experiences across the board in our organization. You mentioned something earlier as we approached the anniversary of Katrina. COVID in March really felt in some ways very similar based on the mindset when we actually had the school closure. I can still remember in August for Katrina, we thought we were going back to school. Sort of the same mindset in March. We thought that we would be able to stabilize this pandemic within a week and hopefully return back with our families, and instantly found that that was not going to be the case, and definitely had to transition to paper resources, computer resources, and trying to stabilize as much as possible for our families and students. I can honestly say that I can definitely highlight the resiliency of our staff members who are trying to make this work. It has been challenging in a lot of different forefronts. It definitely has highlighted once again the inequities of our city when it comes to Black and brown families across the board, as well as a lot of our families with resources that they can provide to assist their children each and every day. One thing that I've always stated, virtual learning was never set up for the actual parent to be working from home at the same time of actually trying to teach the virtual components of school. That's been very challenging for our families each and every day, and we're still experiencing those challenges now. So hopefully things turn around fast or soon to provide that education that our students and our families desperately need to make sure that for our future generations, they will be educated and be able to have wonderful outcomes for themselves.
So you mentioned racial inequality, which I think is something we'll come back to more. But how in those initial days did that affect either the decisions you were making or how it was playing out in students' homes?
Well, in many cases, the schools are serving as a central hub in a lot of different aspects. Not only did we have to provide the packets, we provided the technology, we provided the hotspots, the grab and go meals, that we haven't provided a lot of different aspects that the traditional school would not normally feel if it wasn't for a pandemic. So it has stretched us a lot. That's why I cannot compliment the resiliency of everyone who are engaged in the school system to make sure all of these parts are actually working, because at the same time we're trying to fulfill the instructional component, we're trying to organize the meal component during the same time to provide for our community who desperately needs all these different aspects.
Yeah.
What I understand, and I'll add to it, the number of families that do not have working internet in the home is very shocking. That I think not only education plays a part, but I think it is an overall city conversation of how we're going to provide for our families who desperately need more than what the schools can just provide, where families can not only provide for themselves, but our generational families, kids as well.
And one thing that hasn't come up yet is the district distributed, as I understand it, laptops and hotspots. Could you talk about how that played out in your school?
It was definitely useful for the district to provide those extra laptops and those hotspots. We did distribute those items, but our need was even greater than what we were actually allocated. So we only had to fulfill a lot of those needs, and we're still continuously fulfilling a lot of those needs. Where, as Liz mentioned earlier, the time that students are actually spending on the computer virtually is just a heavy transition, although we're providing all of those equipments for our students to be able to utilize. So not only is it a transition from the physical being in front of students and teachers every day, just the transition to technology, the usage is a transition as well mentally for all of our teachers and families.
And I know this is kind of a mundane question, but I'm just kind of curious on the hotspots. Do they work really well? Do you get a good connection? Is it a stable connection?
It depends on where you are. Depends on where you are actually accessing from with the hotspot. Based on the number of students who are actually utilizing internet right now, it has slowed down in the city tremendously based on how many individuals are signing on at the same time. That's still being worked out, but I think the provider is doing the best that they can, but no one ever expected to have this many individuals utilizing Google Classroom, utilizing Zoom, utilizing internet service all at the same time for classes to actually be starting.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jamar. Allison, so you're a parent and also representing parents, I think, with your other hat on. Why don't you tell us about your experiences in the spring?
Yes, good afternoon, and I'm glad to be a part of this panel with everyone. I had the fortunate opportunity to have a dual role, being a parent and an educator. As I heard earlier, March 13th is going to be forever etched in my mind because it was the last day when I left work, expecting to return on Monday. Didn't happen. And I haven't seen the majority of my students since that day. As an educator, you connect with your students, you have a relationship with them, and to not have that and it end abruptly, it is disheartening sometimes. I think.
Do you mean you haven't seen them on video either, or did you see some of them in person maybe, or just?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. Okay. Fortunately, I already implemented the platform using Google Classroom. So our school, we were able to actually transition pretty well to Google Classroom. And I still communicated with them, but having to see them visually, we didn't have that, not yet. This year is different. I think it's a better system that we've set up here. But being a mom, a wife, a mom, and a teacher, and having to balance it the way I did in the spring, it was a stretch, but a good stretch, because I was able to learn what I didn't think I knew. And I know for a lot of parents that don't have the education that I have, don't have the experience or the knowledge that I have, it probably stressed them even more. Sometimes I'm working full time with my students, have to switch over because, mommy, I have a question, and having to, okay, hold on one moment, let me finish this email, or I'm grading papers right now, or whatever I would be doing for school, having to balance that. I'm grateful that God has given me the opportunity to be able to do that. But I know there are other parents that didn't have that. They didn't have the resources that my family has. They didn't have the ability to do that. I think the thing that I took away the most from enduring last spring with COVID-19 is that word, resiliency. We always throw it around, but I see that children are really resilient. My son was able to hit the ground and he finished on honor roll. That's what's expected. But for those who they have to have the gap, the bridge has to, that gap right there. As an educator, now it's my responsibility to bring those who maybe fell behind, but to get them on the right trajectory so that they can be successful for this new school year. So it was difficult, but nonetheless a challenge.
Yeah. All right. So that's what happened in the spring. So then we fast forward into summer, and then we're trying to figure out, well, what do we do now? Right? You don't really know what's going to happen in the fall exactly, and now we're at the fall. But anybody want to comment on? I think the uncertainty has been one of the biggest challenges here. Not knowing what to plan for exactly. So how do you plan when you don't know what you're planning for? Because of a crisis like this, and how did that affect what you did in the summer to get ready?
Okay, if I may, I think as a parent and as a teacher, educator, the hot button now is, are we going to allow our students, our scholars, back into the classroom? I, for one, had that thought because, hey, I have to go in the classroom as well. The summer, I think it was more of a, all right, let's recollect ourselves. Let's, get to the place where we need to focus now for the impending fall semester. So now that we're here, I'm glad we had that small window, because it was a small window that we had to figure it out. I think someone mentioned how quickly things changed. Things are still changing. There's nothing set in stone right now. It's forever evolving. So this summer for me, it was just helping my son prepare for the what ifs, or the may nots, or you may not see them yet. So as a parent, having to have these discussions with our son, my husband and I, we really had the discussions with our son to help him to understand what's ahead, even though we didn't know.
Priscilla, you were going to try to jump in on that question too, right?
Well, the most pressing thing that has been on my mind is that the state is enforcing the instructional minutes. The accountability standards are still applicable, but they're applicable as if this pandemic had not occurred. The problem that schools are having are ongoing, and that families are having are ongoing. And the issue, for example, of attendance, perhaps the student is not able to log on that day, but yet he or she is able to submit their work. Do we count them as present? And the instructional minutes, like I said, are still a requirement. No, they have not been waived. And I understand the reasoning for that, but I also feel that we need to be more empathetic and have a greater understanding of the challenges that are taking places in our homes and in our schools, and be able to work with these schools and support them in the way that we're not penalizing them when it comes to the time of renewal. Because when we penalize the school, we're also penalizing the students. So, those are the big picture concerns that I have, that I feel are not being adequately addressed or resolved. There's an urgency about all of this, because one of the things that you brought up in the material that you forwarded to us was, the loss of what a student will lose with regards to learning and being on track and being on level. What is the educational loss of that student going to be? And that's going to play a big part when you're talking about high stakes testing and school renewal.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the accountability system. Derek and Jamari are both in the position of school leaders here. What do you think the state should be changing here, both with regard to the accountability system, the letter grading and so on, but also rules like attendance and things that are inherently pretty difficult to implement in this new situation?
Doug, if I can go back to the original question, I don't think there's a day as a school leader that we do not think about the safety of our staff members, our families, our students each and every day. On the forefront, we're trying to develop ways to make sure if there is a return, or if our families are at home, that we're able to at least provide some assistance for their safety first. It's on the forefront of every single day, even before I get to instruction. One aspect that I think is very revealing during this time is how much the whole political nature of this pandemic has made a lot of decisions statewide for a lot of different things that are happening, as well as nationally. I was on a call 2 weeks ago with a state official, and it was interesting talking about reopening. And if you look up north, they're actually in school every single day. K through 5s are in classrooms. If you look at central Louisiana, some places K through 5s are in classrooms. If you look at locally in New Orleans, independent schools, Catholic schools having students every day. So in many cases, when it comes to the accountability measures, I think the state is in a very interesting perspective when some schools are actually in school, what actually happens with the accountability standard. Some schools are not in school, what happens to the accountability standard. How do you waive instructional minutes where some of the individuals believe that students should be in school and they are in school each and every day? That I am as well looking for not only that guidance, but that direction to what would be the overall deciding factor for how the state would actually evaluate students in schools this year. For us, I definitely would like for some considerations on accountability and instructional minutes, because we're not face-to-face with students. Instructional minutes are very difficult based on how we are actually doing things in New Orleans. But the politics of this whole nature is definitely revealing and interesting to watch. Like I said before, even locally, there are schools that are actually in school right now, each and every day. Up north, they're in school each and every day. But for Inspire NOLA, besides accountability and instructional minutes, this is one of the things that I learned after Katrina. The safety of our staff, the safety of our students, the safety of our parents is the number one factor for us that we're working on each and every day, as well as trying to provide, and this goes to Liz's wheelhouse, ways to really allow our students to deal with the trauma that they're facing now, because they were abruptly ended school where they did not have the time to close out with their families, their friends, and now they're at home, and in some cases, safe haven for them that was abruptly taken away. But how do you deal with all of that at the same time talking with accountability and instruction? So before I go to the state, I do hope that the local district and aspects that the local district can control find means to actually provide measures of relief for us first. Then we can actually focus on the state. So I'm also waiting for the local district to decide, what does charter renewals look like? What does waiving of instructional minutes look like? What does waiving of certain aspects that the district actually have in its wheelhouse to actually provide that relief? Then as well, advocate for the state to make some of those same decisions as well.
So you haven't gotten any input from either the district or the state on any relaxation or changes in those rules?
If I have to look at it, I would say that the district is probably waiting on the state, but then the state would also say that the district has certain aspects that they can actually decide now, that they are working in collaboration. And as a school leader, we're waiting for both to actually make that decision so we can know how we operate.
Derek, why don't you chime in on this as well? And then Griselle, I want to come to you to get the board members' perspective on how you're thinking about relaxing some of those rules. Derek, go ahead first.
Thank you. One of those things that Mr. Jamal just spoke about is safety. That's paramount. Even if you go back to Katrina, even though I wasn't here, I was in North Louisiana at the time. But when we had kids and families coming up there, while this may not be the thing that everyone want to hear, but education wasn't at the forefront. What was at the forefront was ensuring that the basic needs of those kids and the families were met. And I think that oftentimes with this educational issue that we are facing, whether it's technology divide, whether it's accountability, we often lose the focus of the safety, the mental health of the kids, and what does it look like, and how do we address it? Because until we meet those basic needs to ensure safety, it's going to be hard to truly educate our kids. When you start looking at the accountability piece and what the state is going to do, once again, I agree that the state is going to say it's up to the district. The district is going to wait on the state in some cases. However, what we do have control over is what we're doing right now to meet those basic needs and making sure our families are safe, making sure we provide them a sense of education. I often also think that in these times, we lose focus of that village mentality. One thing that I noticed during Katrina, after that transpired, where I'm originally from, is that we realized it took all of us we needed each other, whether that's for our basic needs, for education, for transportation, whatever it is, it took every single one of us. And I think what this pandemic is also showing us now is that once again, when things got better, we went off into our own little circle, doing our own thing. And now we realize we once again need each other. We once again realize that throughout this time that the divide has gotten greater when you look at technology. But we must come together in order to produce what we need to produce for our kids. In addition to that, education is not just inside these four walls. Education,
especially now,
education does not stop. It doesn't start when a kid comes into the building, and it doesn't stop when they exit the building. Right. And I think moving forward, what this is going to teach us is that we have to move with time. We have to try to think of different ways. We have to provide those resources to our parents. So we know that you can educate kids everywhere. I was telling someone just the other day, the way we was originally set up in education is a assembly line. Once farming was over, that's when school starts. So farming was most important at that time. So we didn't start school until after farming season ended. Then we move into our manufacturing, and everything is assembly line operated. So now we have to educate kids based off their age and not their abilities. So we have to start thinking about things totally different. And I think this pandemic has helped pushed us sooner than we expected or wanted to.
Thanks, Derek. Grisel, back to this question of the district role, and Jamara initially brought up the relaxation of some of the rules and policies. What's your perspective as a board member and the district's role in that?
Well, yesterday at the committee of the whole meeting that we had, we were introduced, we were presented with what the somewhat relaxed accountability standards that the district is working on developing will be. And there's a lot of schools spent a lot of money integrating and putting into place what is called the Tier 1 curriculum, which is the curriculum that is most rigorous and best aligns with the state standards on the test. And come March, school is out. So now no one gets to test. No one gets to see what effect the Tier 1 curriculum application has made in the achievement of our students. So now what is being proposed is, well, we didn't test, but we can go back and take the past 2 years records, results, and do a comprehensive evaluation. This is, to me, not acceptable. Talking about not renewing or terminating operators, to me, is not the way to go.
You're saying, just to clarify, you're saying two different things. One is it sounds like you don't want to completely relax the standards because you would be looking back in time isn't ideal, but you also don't want to be closing schools in the midst of the pandemic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that the standards need to be less stringent. I think that considerations have to be made. Many of the, just like what was mentioned earlier about the safety of faculty, the safety of administration, the safety of students. When you remove that personal interaction between teacher and student, which is, by the way, what I called for, I called for a starting virtual learning, the year in virtual learning, because of the safety concerns, because a pandemic is a health crisis, and we don't want to lose anyone or put anybody in a hospital because we want to be in person. But the in-person interaction is a tremendous difference in the results that you're going to get. So those kinds of considerations have to be taken into place when you're talking about accountability standards and school renewals.
Yeah, one reason the accountability matters is that it may put pressure on schools to do things that may go against public safety. Liz, I know you wanted to comment more on the safety side of this, so let me turn to you.
Yeah, I was just going to offer like a slightly different perspective or push us to think about what we mean by safety, right? Because Derek talked about both the trauma that kids have experienced as a result of this and their families by extension, and traumas that we did not attend to in the wake of Katrina. We went back to school like full throttle, let's make up for all this lost time and not attend to other types of needs that we know are foundational for kids being able to learn. But I think we're being asked to make a really tough choice around like safety as it pertains to public health illness, safety as it pertains to trauma, exposure, et cetera. And we're a tiny organization. We also serve some of the most at-risk youth in the city. So perhaps what we're seeing is disproportionate. But frankly, what I worry about when I look at the health data, and if that continues to trend, I worry far more about my kids' emotional wellness and quite literally their physical safety than I do some of the health-related concerns about the pandemic. I have 3 kids who've been incarcerated since we went to a fully virtual model, 2 for murder. And I worry tremendously, it is not that a school or a day program can solve all of the issues that are out there and keep kids safe all of the time. But there's a real trade-off that there is no good solution here. But I'm optimistic that we can continue to see positive trends in health data and push to getting at least a tiered approach to getting our most at-risk kids back in some
so it
type
seems
of
like one of the big challenges here
support.
is that we have, on the one hand, the direct pandemic effects, the direct public health effects of spreading the virus and so on. But partly what you're getting at is all the indirect health effects that closing down has on people. So those things are kind of at odds with each other. Let me just remind everybody in the audience that you can send in questions and they'll be forwarded on to me, and I'll try to get to some of those a little later on as well. But let's turn back to a topic that we've alluded to a little bit in different pieces, and that's what I would call the opportunity gap, or the gaps in outcomes that we see amongst students. So there's been a lot of concern about this nationally, that we're likely to see widening gaps because of some students who really aren't able to access, especially the live, remote, computer-based learning that we talked about earlier, and there were a couple of stories about in other cities, 20% of students totally disconnected from all forms of learning based on the reporting of what the educators are saying. What's your take on what to do about that? To what degree do you think that's happening in your own schools, and what can we do to reduce that problem? Anybody want to jump in on that? Jamar?
No, I'm saying Derek was starting.
Okay.
No, I was trying to ask him. I'm sorry. Restate the question for me.
The opportunity gap and gaps in outcomes across different groups of students based on their ability to access learning during this time of crisis. You're on mute right now, Derek.
No, I said if anyone else wanted to, but since I'm on, yes, and I'll go back to the overall topic as it relates to Katrina and this pandemic. And I think in one of the studies you alluded to that the time that was lost for kids and how long it took them to recover. That's going to be when we continue to look at education as a sole environment and a location. I think we really have to begin to look at education holistically, that we're not just educating kids from a start time and a stop time, or from a inside of 4 walls. And it has to be a community thing. Go back to that village. That in every aspect of a child's life, we should be educating. It should be correlated from when I go to the grocery store to when I'm in the building to I'm at church or playing with my friend. Everything, our playground, our parks, all of those things should be aligned to the point where we are educating kids. While I understand we've been charged with the responsibility of educating kids, but I think it's bigger than just educating kids. It's bigger. We must also educate our families, because somewhere along the way, we all, my dad didn't finish high school. My dad didn't finish middle school. But what he did attain, to this day, my dad turned 72 Sunday. He can read, he can write, he can draw, he can build anything, he can spit out fractions. So everything that the basic things that we're teaching, now granted, I understand what comes from God, but at the same time, it wasn't just solely what he learned inside that one room classroom. It was all the entire community that was educated. So I say all that to say, yes, there are going to always be some gaps. There's going to be some gaps if we're in the building every day and our kids are being taught by uncertified teachers, or if it's a substitute. So there are always going to be some form of gap. And what do we do as educators? You all have already stated how resilient they are. We continue to overcome. We diagnose, we test them to find out where they are, where are the gaps, and how can we improve them. Now, granted, like Mr. Jamar stated earlier, our Black and brown kids are always seem to be further behind in some cases. So we just have to continue to work and provide that same continuity for them at a higher level.
Derek, in your school, what percentage of kids would you say became disconnected fully from school, where you basically lost touch with them? You know, they weren't, if you were doing online, they weren't doing online, or they weren't turning in materials through the packets and so on.
We were speaking towards the spring. I would say initially, I would say about a good 50% of them didn't think it was real. Hey, we on a break. Because once again, we all thinking that we were coming back. But once it set in to say, hey, no, this is your grade. You're not going to graduate. You're not going to move to, and we provide that opportunity for you to log in and to pick up your package and turn that information back in. It started to increase. And going back to that divide of technology, as we stated earlier, NOLA PS did give us those hotspots and things. But once again, there was still some lacking there. So we still had to make that up as well. So it increased as the semester went on.
Jamar, do you want to add to that? You're on mute.
I definitely want to add to what Liz is saying, the direct and indirect effect on what's actually happening. We're actually experiencing a lot of the same concerns that Liz actually just mentioned as well. When I look at our enrollment data as of today, we're actually around the same percentage that Derek is talking about. School for us, it started about a week and a half. And when I look at our enrollment data, in some of our schools, we're down roughly around 25 to 30% of families not actually signing online, not actually being engaged into the virtual process, which is also concerning for me as well. Going back to 15 years ago, one of the things that I am concerned even now as we have this conversation is if you look at the true opportunities, if you look at the demographics around poverty, you look at the demographics around crime, all schools started performing better as far as the accountability standards. We didn't really see the true opportunity impact of what it looks like in our communities, especially Black and brown communities in New Orleans. I read something this morning that said that the drop rate right now is double what it was during Katrina. So if I look at how hard we had to work just to get to this point 15 years ago, and now we have to work extremely hard again to get to the same point for 15 years or 30 years, what exactly does it say to our communities who are in a heavier need to really have opportunities and impact actually change their trajectory? I'm even more concerned, as I stated earlier, the inequalities that I'm seeing in our city as a whole for our youth. That's even more concerning of how this pandemic will affect our youth for the next 15 to 30 years. Think about the child who was happy to go to pre-K, happy to go to first grade, happy to go to kindergarten. And now their whole experience for their start of school for kindergarten, when they're learning the foundation of reading, foundation of sound, is virtually. So what happens to that child 5 years from now or 10 years from now, where now they're starting to approach high school? How does that affect them of the lost learning that is roughly going to be about a year that schools will have to try to catch up once we return back in person? So it's a heavy lift, but there are a lot of concerns, and I definitely comment again on the resiliency that I think our staff is willing to take on the task, but there will be very heavy ripple effects for a district that's underfunded, for a city that don't have the necessary resources, nor the opportunities for our student families to have quality jobs to be able to impact to the level degree, where education in many cases is the silver bullet for a lot of the students that we serve. So how the district figures that out to assist us, how the state figures that out. But if I just track from the last 15 years, although we made some gains, we're still so far away. Now we have another pandemic that's hitting us 15 years later. You're looking at a generational loss. So for me, going back to Liz's point, I have to weigh the direct and indirect effects to understand how for youth that I want to see be successful for their future, how exactly do I close that gap? So it's a very hard decision. A lot of us think about it every single night of what's happening to our youth each and every day, especially those toddlers or those students in elementary school who need those foundational skills to be able to progress in their education.
So I'm going to go to Liz next, but one quick follow-up question. So, I think you're pointing to these long-term effects on younger kids now as another indirect effect of all this. And you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, because I know it's a sensitive question. Would you like to see a different decision made about going back in person so that we could go back? Are you more inclined to go back in person right now, at least for some students to try to avoid those losses, or do you think that staying remote right now is the right thing to do?
So I'm one who like to follow the health officials first. If they have a roadmap that they've actually put out, that if we meet that roadmap, there should be some considerations if we can provide the education safely. It's important that all schools are set up first for safety measures first to make sure no staff members are being put at risk or in danger. And if we are able to fulfill some of those requirements, we would have some considerations, especially for those pre-K, kindergarten, first grade students, to see what can actually happen. But until we actually really look at the data and understand what we can do around testing, are we at a downward trend? We are leaning more towards safety with the understanding of what needs to happen to be able to facilitate learning for our youth.
Okay. Liz, you wanted to chime in on this too.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I think, Doug, you asked this question about inequity, opportunity gap, and Jamar said, okay, so what can I do? And I would say this is not a problem that Jamar can solve. I think what I've been thinking so much about during this pandemic is stuff, Jamar, I hear you talk about a lot when you're at panels like this, but are the systemic issues that are at play, right? And so, I don't know if any of you read this, what to me was a really profound article in Rolling Stone by this Canadian historian who, kind of critiquing America's response to the coronavirus. But he said something that was so profound, which was, when I go to the grocery store as an educated PhD who's affluent, whatever, and I'm getting checked out by the cashier. Yeah, I know that I make more money. I know that I have a lot more resources than this person does. But I know that our kids probably go to the same school because we live in the same neighborhood and our country has invested in really quality public education. I know that this person has the same access to healthcare that I do. I know that this person has the same access to childcare and the subsidies that I have. And we've entered in this social contract where we have some equal footing in a way that we just haven't invested in here. And so, I'm thinking about childcare. I'm thinking about nutrition being tied to schools and the work that NOLA PS did to make sure that there was food distribution across the city. And there are just some real large issues that we're not going to totally solve the opportunity gap until we figured out how to make sure that there is some equal footing in our social safety net.
Yeah, great points. We do have a couple questions from the audience now. I'll say full disclosure, even though this is a public event, these are from reporters. So take that as background. One of the questions that I'm just going to paraphrase is about, to the point on public safety, should the schools or the district be required to release the number of positive tests of faculty or students in schools? So there's a debate about this. Some of it's related to privacy, I think, but privacy of individuals. But schools could certainly report aggregate numbers of positive cases or indications of positive cases. Anybody have a quick take on that one?
Well, I'll venture to say that if it's one case, if it's an isolated case, because of the privacy issues and because of the delicacy of the situation, you don't want to freak people out, but you you want to make sure that your employees or your students are identified. I know that there is a process, because I asked this yesterday, by which schools are going to be reporting to the district, any cases of COVID. But as thus far, I don't know that that's a sizable number at all, because we just haven't had students in the classroom, and there are some teachers in the school, but I don't think that there have been any incidences of this. Now, if it tends to, if once we do, push the button and go back in person, and you begin to get a number of cases at schools, then I think it's the honest and the public safety thing to do, to say, look, we've got a hot spot here. We've got to, move to keep everybody safe. But it is something that we need to.
Derek and Jamar, do you guys
consider.
have policies set up? I know you're not back in person yet, so it's not quite maybe necessary yet to have the policy. But have you already thought ahead on that question? If you go back in person, would you plan to report the number of positive cases?
I guess for us in Inspire NOLA, we always going to lean on the confidentiality of our staff members and our students. I would like to stay out of the whole political debate. If you look at local businesses, they don't have to report how many cases they have in their offices. If I look at the grocery store, I don't hear them reporting how many cases that they have in their grocery stores. I think for some cases, when we're dealing with the youth, our families would like for us to keep them informed and not make a large political conversation around one of our schools have had this many cases, then there's a larger debate on what should actually happen. As educators, our number one priority is to make sure that not only the safety of our students and our families, but the rights of our families and students are always protected. And I kind of lean towards that. The information would be given to the district for consultation, and the district would be that communicator as far as if they would like to say, based in the district, this is what has happened. But I would like for it to not be individual schools. This one school has had this happen. If it's not, that is practiced everywhere.
Yeah, it seems like it has to be either required of everybody or nobody, because no individual school is going to want to report cases if no other school is reporting. If they're just deciding not to report the case, it would be unfair to that school. So
or I even lean towards this: if a business start reporting how many cases they have in their local businesses, then I'll even have some consideration. But I don't see that happening as well.
All right, let's see. We have another question. So this actually goes back to Jamar, something you were saying earlier about the number of students who were either not enrolled or disengaged. I'd like to actually get you to clarify that a little bit. You said to start the school year, a certain percentage, I think 20% were either not enrolled or not engaged in learning. The question that came in from a reporter is, what's the estimate of how many children in New Orleans still lack access to individual devices and internet and so on? So there's actually two parts of this question. One is who could, technically speaking, with the standpoint of internet and computers, who doesn't have access, who might want it? And then the bigger question is, well, how many students in total still aren't accessing learning right now?
So right now it's still roughly around 20 to 25% of our families still not accessing learning every day. We are doing everything from social media, radio advertisement, school messenger blast, engaging our families to let them know virtually school has started. So we do have an aggressive campaign and it's improving every day. As far as the access to computers, we are fulfilling that growing need every single day. We have had numerous computer distribution days, but it seems every single day families have additional need or requests, and we're definitely fulfilling that as much as possible for those students every day. The big issue now that we're working through is exactly the internet service. I do wish the city had some form of universal wireless that all of our students can access. That I know the city is definitely looking into it and trying to solve, but just understanding that it's not available right now. We're working through the understanding of how do we assist families with internet? How do we assist families with hotspots? Just what exactly is the need to be able to assure that students is signing on every single day? I can tell you this, virtually there is a lot of fatigue when it comes to staying online at least 8 hours a day for multiple days. that students make decisions, and we definitely understand, and we're trying to balance that as well to make sure that there are some down times, there are some light times to be able to facilitate that. But in a city like New Orleans, there's heavy need when it comes to access for technology as well as internet usage based on the families that we serve each and every day.
All right.
Citywide, a lot of technology for each and every one of our schools, as well as system-wide, as well as hotspots, but the need is still greater than what has been provided, and we're still trying to work to facilitate that need as much as possible.
And okay, so you said it's 20% who are kind of not engaged. Did you see any effect on enrollment? So the kids come back and they're formally enrolled, they're just not engaged.
So that 20% is across our schools who have not entered at least one day that we're trying to actually contact to understand for these families that school has actually started virtually. We had some conversation with families, and some of them even thought school was starting September 9th, and they just said, I'll wait till school go in person to actually start. So we wasn't able to assure that we will actually be back September 9th, that virtually school has started, so we needed for them to sign on. So just the whole messaging, the whole understanding that school has started on various different days that schools are starting has been a challenge as well to engage families that we need you to sign on. We need you to be present for a lesson so we can actually have the school start for that child. But we are patient. We haven't lost hope. We're definitely still excited about what we're doing and working with families each and every day. When students sign on, we make it a big deal, and it's working.
All right. We're getting into the last half hour now. So we sort of talked about the past, we talked about the spring, and then we talked about kind of where we're at and the difficulty of planning and so on. Let's talk about the future. So what do we do next? What's the most important thing we need to work on going forward? Allison, you haven't had a chance to chime in here a bit.
And I'm sorry.
Hey, that's totally appropriate background noise in this. We're glad to hear a school bell, actually.
I wish I had my students here, but okay, yeah. What can you do? I think right now, and I must say, my son's school, they're on the right track with being able to get the students to where they need to be. I wanted to mention this. I know Inspire NOLA, I received the email, Ms. McKinley, about McNeely, sorry, the learning hubs. And I thought about it, and I was sharing with a neighbor of mine on last night, how having that access for those parents who would like to participate with the learning hubs, I think that's a good reach for the parents, because my neighbor shared with me that they were going to, her family as well as some other families were going to hire someone to help their children while they're doing virtual. But I thought about, what about the parents who don't have the means to hire someone, don't have the means? I mean, if we're still looking at families that don't have access to internet, I mean, even with and I'll just say, even with the learning hubs, how we still have families that rely on public transportation, school transportation. How do they even get to the learning hubs? So I like the idea of having that platform for our children, but I think about the scholars or the students that aren't able to have access to that as well. I think going forward, communication is key for parents. As a parent of a fifth grader, it's my responsibility, it's my husband's responsibility to make sure that our son has everything that he needs, right? So when it comes to from the platform that the school is using to educate our children, to making sure that there's a social aspect too, that as someone mentioned earlier, that we experience, the children are lacking. Unfortunately, we have a good support system, but you have students, scholars that don't have that. So going forward, I would like to see definitely more communication with parents, making sure that the parents are on board with the changes that are being made. The parents are able to, here we go again, that's the tardy bell, sorry. Someone's late somewhere. There we go. I would like to see definitely more engagement. I can appreciate the e-blast. I can appreciate even the text, but I know at this time that is so crucial, having that engagement, that parental involvement. I mean, I'm a stakeholder, you know, I'm a stakeholder as well. And I know I don't make the final decision, but I would like to have some say in what's going on.
Derek, Jamar, I'll come to you in a second, Rosella. Are you surveying parents about, you know, their, you know, how they want to handle this, or asking them or providing resources to them in general since now so much of learning has shifted home, so the responsibility is much more on parents. How are you thinking about that relationship between the school and home?
So one of the good things that I have to tip my hat off to our leadership is establishing those committees of parents, health providers, all at the beginning in the summer, preparing for our opening, whether it was going to be virtual, hybrid, or face-to-face. So getting those stakeholders, getting their input early on, ensuring that our kids have that one-to-one capability, discussing the learning hubs, as Ms. Allison just spoke about, the locations and how would that be handled. Moving forward into this current year, and what parents and stakeholders are at, you know, we have these parent informational bi-weekly. We started off weekly, but now, you know, we're going to start off transitioning to every 2 weeks, just basically like Ms. Allison just said, not only giving information, but allowing parents to voice their concern. Okay, how did week 1 go? Okay, we are in the process of ending up week 2. How did this week go? What did you see? What issues did you run into with your kids logging in or not logging in? Were there any technology issues? So getting that feedback on an ongoing basis, not just through surveys, but actually through our Zoom meetings with parents has given us some insight on how we move from week to week.
How are you handling the learning hubs at your school? So are you encouraging or helping organize those hubs, and how is that playing out?
So yeah, actually a couple of weeks ago on a radio show, the parents were suggesting, hey, they need to work together in that village. So they was actually talking about doing it as parents, but like so many have stated, you know, like if I go to work and you're at home and you have the internet, can my kid work with your kid during the day while you supervising type thing? So actually some of that started with parents. So now we're looking at how we can help families with that from a school standpoint and local organizations.
So I'm wondering, you know, I was asked about this myself a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that occurred to me is that the school is actually uniquely situated to help build those hubs, in part because, especially in a choice-based system, a lot of the parents don't know where the other families live, and since the point is to bring families together physically in a location, that they would need to know who's nearby to be able to even figure out who to have in their hub or who to try to organize with. So is that part of the role as you see it for the school to help organize that?
Yes, sir. And I step out on a limb and go even further, going back to that village mentality. You know, we so often, you know, and I would say what I've learned that education has become so competitive from one location to the next. And at the end of the day, we all going back to the same neighborhood, the same community. And we have to find ways for us to work together. So whatever Mr. Jamar is doing that helping his kids should be able to help our kids, where we are feeding kids from one school. We have to find a way to start working. And that's one of those things that's going to start bridging that gap and allowing us not to wait those 15 years to get those kids to the point where they need to be. So the more we can find ways to work together and understand why we're not so different and where we are alike at, I think it's not going to just benefit our organization, but it's going to benefit our community in the long run.
Jamar, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I want to thank Ms. Allison for definitely acknowledging one of the things that we recognized early on from talking to our families was the need and need of high speed access. So what we decided to do as an organization is twofold. Not only were we able to provide small venues within our school access where families can actually register to come utilize our internet, because it was a lot faster than actually a home internet because it was more commercial.
Right, right.
But at the same time, it also allowed us, since we were having grab and go meals, to make sure those students had breakfast and lunch as well. So a lot of this, as Mr. White mentioned, or Dr. White mentioned, that it's facilitated based on need. Families right now have a lot of needs based on what's happening in our city. And if we can be a partner to provide some relief, I think as schools, we have to be willing to do everything that we can do to provide that relief to those families who trust us each and every day to not only educate their child, but provide a safe atmosphere for our students each and every day. And I think a lot of that is lost. We're seeing the aspect that we are able to provide virtual learning, we are able to provide instruction, but that association of peers, just to see another student, just to understand that there's breakfast, there's supper, there's lunch in that school each and every day, and high-speed internet, that has been a safe haven for a lot of our students that they count on each and every day. Whether it's seeing an adult to say we can do this in person, and just understanding what traditionally schools have provided, that I think when there's a pandemic, when there's a natural disaster like Katrina, that it really shows our mettle during these times on how we're stepping up to provide that need. So for me, I'm one who like to run to the situation and understand how much is possible that I can try to embrace the need, because we understand that all of us have to accept that role and responsibility if we're willing to work with students. As I mentioned earlier, our communities have a lot of needs. And I guess this goes back to the point that your original question, and I'll close up by saying this. I'm extremely concerned about how not only as an educational sector, but as a community, as a city, we close the gap for our students who are most vulnerable. We have not solved that. We're still trying to work through that every single day. And the longer it takes means more funerals, more generations that are lost, that a lot of us are experiencing working in schools each and every day. So for me, I like to say that it's time for us as a New Orleans community, it's time for us across sectors, rally together to understand how we can change the trajectory of what's happening in our youth, so they won't have to face the same struggles that adults are now facing as grown individuals.
So let me go in a little different direction here. We touched on mental health and other even physical health needs. What about counselors? How are you making access to counselors? If anybody wants to take this one, it's not just the academic side, and Liz has been talking about that topic from the standpoint of her center, but the schools also have a role in that too. So how is that playing out? Can students easily access counselors?
I'm sorry, Dr. White.
No, ma'am.
I would say in my past life, I was a mental health therapist before becoming an educator. And I know our school is we're looking into offering telehealth as a way for our students to have access to agencies or different agencies. It's just in the works right now, but I think having that type of access would be beneficial to a lot of the students that are at home. That's just my piece to that.
Liz, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we immediately jumped on the telehealth bandwagon, obviously, as we had to switch to virtual options, and it was helpful that there were relaxed restrictions on, HIPAA compliance and those kinds of things, so that you could be flexible in the platforms you were using. That's just an additional consideration, is making sure that if you are going to do counseling, that you're following all of the confidentiality norms and requirements. So I think access to that is going to be essential. Especially as we think about helping kids navigate the transition back from being in their home and community settings eventually into a physical building. That's a transition in and of itself. One of the things that that has also been offered, and I saw that there was a question that came up from someone about, what are the social emotional supports beyond just counselors. I know that some of the folks affiliated with the Trauma Informed Schools Collaborative have done some webinars through NOLA Public Schools and available to all of our schools, have done some sessions on recognizing the signs of trauma. How do you address that for your staff so you're creating a healthy environment? How do you address it for kids on everything from classroom design to the scheduling of the day, as well as providing the mental health supports? I think there are also things, knowing that we always feel like there's a shortage of mental health workers in the school setting often. What are other opportunities that folks can have to just process, starting the day in groups to talk about how you're feeling, what you're bringing with you to the school day, doing the same thing at the end of the day so that there's opportunities for kids to connect in other ways is going to be a really important aspect as we transition back to kids.
So we'll have about 15 minutes left, and so we've got room for a couple more questions if anybody wants to put them in. One other follow-up to that earlier topic is that schools are often the places that report and identify trauma and abuse that might be happening outside of school. and now that students are working remotely, it would seem a lot harder for schools to be able to see those things. The signs are just harder, I imagine, to see on a Zoom video or indirectly through the assignments and things that might be coming in. Anybody have thoughts on what is happening in that regard, and whether there's anything the schools can be doing there?
So one of the things that we actually instituted during the spring, when we noticed some of the teachers were having concerns, and some of the kids and parents were addressing, reporting some concerns they just had with the kids. Our social workers and our behavior interventionists doing phone calls, checkups that has nothing necessarily to do with academics, but just calling home. And not just, what we realized, we are not just checking on the kids, we checking on the entire family, because it's affecting the entire family. So we've added to that the start of this school year with our social worker and our BIs to actually start making home visits, just checking on. So as of this week, as Mr. Jamal mentioned earlier about those kids who've been assigned to us through one app, but maybe hadn't picked up their technology or hadn't logged in, they're actually going out checking on them, saying, "Hey, how's everything? Why are you are you having some issues with getting to the school? Do you want us to bring your technology to you?" And also, when teachers notice kid hadn't logged in, they are making those phone calls. Once again, social workers and BIs have kids already in their system where they've been dealing with, working with in the previous year. So those are automatic. But now to add some of our newer kids in there, just to make that home visit, and parents that they have started going to are very appreciative of that.
So they're making home visits too?
Yes.
Just with the new students or with all students?
All students.
Oh, interesting.
I actually would agree with that, and I know Ms. Allison and Ms. Dr. White would agree with this one as well. Just because students are not coming to school does not mean they're staying in the home, right? So a lot of the home visits that we're making, we are seeing students at parks, we're seeing students out in their driveways, we're seeing students outside the natural home, just saying, let me be a part of virtual learning, or let me just be inside my home playing it safe. So we're doing check-in systems. We have coaches working with students who are reaching out, doing home visits, just to provide that emotional support, to also encourage students to be as safe as possible. But during that downtime, you have to understand idle minds brings about a lot of different other activities that we find our students actually engaging in. So this is one of the things that are balancing that I wish I can say, okay, we all virtual at home, school's not open, that students are actually abiding by those rules and staying inside every day. That's just not the reality of what's actually happening. That brings a lot of concerns where our outreach has actually increased on how we provide a larger safety net to try to provide some services for students, counseling, support, mentoring each and every day.
So I ask a different question. Thanks for those responses. So, most of the discussion, and in fact, a lot of the decisions so far has been, you're open or you're closed. And it seems like there are a lot of interesting things that other districts are doing, and other schools, even within the city, are doing that are more in between, bringing back only vulnerable students, bringing back only younger kids, since they seem to spread the virus at a lower rate and seem less susceptible to it. Any thoughts on that as a way forward in New Orleans? If we can't go back to fully in person?
I think it still depends on the data and what the data is saying, and how schools have set themselves up to make sure, from a healthy standpoint, everyone who is engaging in in-person return as much as possible have the ability to stay safe. All I can state is, for myself and Inspire NOLA, there are some concerns for the vulnerable communities that need school each and every day, on how that safety net of school is also providing for those families. I'm also concerned about, like I stated earlier, our pre-K through 1 babies, when it comes to understanding fundamentals of school, what exactly is happening with them. I know the district is looking at all scenarios, and we actually are providing some of that guidance as far as what potentially can happen. I think if the data continues to trend downward, I think we have to be open for creative solutions, with safety being first, to provide some avenues for those students who need that support and that structure and that community to be able to do some great things for themselves, to lead for our parents as well.
Yeah. Priscilla, you would have some decision-making authority in that as a board member. What's your view on a partial return?
Well, I can make a recommendation, but I agree with Mr. McNeely, with Jamar, that safety is the #1 priority. However, I do understand how much our schools are being asked to do. When I first restarted Crocker, we thought we needed a nurse, but what we really needed was a social worker. So that's what we got. And eventually we got 2 social workers, because the social and emotional needs of the students really needed to be addressed. And so much more so at this particular time. So much more is being asked of our parents, of our grandparents, of our families. And this is where Dr. White, when he talks about the village, this is where the village has to come into play, and everybody has to be all hands on deck. I remember when my child was young, we had him reading everything. We weren't depending on the internet. I don't know if the internet was up when he was growing up, or to the extent that it is now. But, the newspaper, the comics, paperback books, the signs on the street, the signs on the buses, everything was about him learning. Everything was about his progress. And it didn't necessarily have to take place in a classroom, to echo what Dr. White is saying. But everybody has to get involved. And whether it's inside the classroom, outside the classroom, at the home, we have all of these situations happening around us all the time. And we just have to be able to come together as a community, come together as a city. The ills and the woes that we're battling each day, they're societal ills and societal woes that have been around for a very long time and are just really being magnified because of what COVID is doing to us. We have to be able to acknowledge them, address them, provide resources for them, provide support, do everything that we can as families, as parents, as teachers, as social workers, as members of the community, to let people know we're here, we're willing to help. We want to be able to support you. We want to be able to provide what you need. And it's tough, it's difficult, but I think the resilience, not just of our students, but of everyone on this panel, educators that are working from their homes each and every day, families that are concerned. I saw one of the questions, as a parent, what resource can I employ to be able to help my child at home? So these are things that constant communication needs to be able to open that channel between parent and home and school and community. and keep going.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Priscilla. So we've just got a few minutes left. I want to give everybody a chance to sort of make a closing remark, just a couple of minutes each. But as part of that, I'm interested in how you think New Orleans is doing compared to other cities, either nearby or not. Any other places you might be familiar with. We did a report out of our sister center called the Reach Center that studies school choice nationally. And one of the results of that, we looked at private schools, charter schools, traditional public schools, and there were some interesting patterns in that. Charter schools responded more comprehensively back in the spring than other kinds of schools. Urban schools responded more comprehensively than others. And there were some other interesting patterns. Actually, the other interesting one I'll mention is that the education level of parents and other adults in the neighborhood was actually the strongest predictor of how schools responded and how much they responded with live instruction and maintaining academic standards and so on. So, but thinking about that same question with New Orleans, how are we doing compared to other places, and where do we really need to improve? So I'm going to have just call on folks now, and we'll go through and give everybody a chance to answer that question and make any other last remark. Allison, do you want to start?
Why, sure. I think right now that it was a shock. We were shocked in the spring with the pandemic. And we're still learning information. We're still learning the data because we have a group now that are recovering from the virus. How does that look for the students that are at home? I recall one of our students. He wasn't responding, so we were wondering. We actually had to do footwork to find out what was happening. Well, we find out. Everyone in his house was in the hospital. And he's a senior. Can you imagine your senior year, with all of your loved ones in the hospital and you're home alone? And that was just one example, but there are many other examples of students that are at home having to deal with the realities of this virus and still having to maintain their academic life, that family versus academics. Ms. Jackson said how we are having to deal with these ills that were already there. COVID just magnified them, put them on spotlight, that we need to address these issues. And here forth, I would like to definitely be in constant communication. My husband and I are very vocal when it comes to our son's education. We are very into the school, proponents of having communication with the school, just in general, but just having that opportunity to have a seat at the table.
Yeah, those are great points. So how do you think the schools have responded? The ones that you're most familiar with, how do you think the schools have done in responding to it?
I can only share with my school, my son's school. They've been doing a pretty good job with keeping us informed. If we have a question, we're able to have a contact person, a point of contact, which is good. I think with the whole school itself, I think the constant inclusion for parents is very, that's what I'm hearing. The inclusion of parents and making sure that our voices are heard has been a big theme from the circles that I'm in.
That we need to do more of it, or that it's been okay?
We need more of it.
Okay.
We need more of it. I think total transparency, I think having the opportunity to have that voice has really been a big overarching theme for moving forward for the school year.
Yeah. And on the instructional side, do you think that they've done a good job?
Oh, I can be a little biased, but I think going on with the new platforms, I feel really confident in myself. I feel confident with my team that we're able to reach our students where they are and pulling those who are a little behind with us. I think it's a whole new frontier for everyone. It's almost like my first day back at my first day of teaching, but with these new parameters. But I think as we move on and we evolve, Mr. McNeely said this earlier, 15 years from now, it's gonna be completely different. Who we would have never thought we would be at this as educators, having to teach. Here I am in an empty classroom, but I had class today.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Allison. Rick, go next.
Yeah, I was going to jump in and say, so I'm on a group text with a bunch of education leaders who are friends, and that's popped up since COVID, kind of about what's happening in our respective cities, a few different places in the Northeast and the Midwest, and really consistently since March 13th. I think we've done a better job than a lot of comparable districts around the country. Like the very fast action to ensure that there were Chromebooks ordered with the intent that at least there is one device delivered to every family, that there were hotspots ordered. I mean, we tried separately to order hotspots, and we were on a 2-month wait before they were delivered because they were in such demand in our area. And that just really spoke to the district's response. And my colleagues in other districts in the country who work with a really comparable population did not see such fast action around making sure that tech access was there. Now that we're thinking about what does a return to school look like, NOLA PS was the first district in the state to have a reopening plan. And I think there's been a lot of partnership with other entities to inform that plan. So, whether it's Children's Hospital New Orleans, the Department of Health, and there's a real reliance on data and reflection on data that I think is allowing us to make decisions at least a little bit more ahead. I imagine what it must be like to be an educator in Jefferson Parish, where you're getting these incremental, like, we're going to start school here. Nope, we're going to push it back a little bit more. Like, I think that in Orleans, we've been able to look a little bit longer into the future because we've been so reliant on data. But you asked about how we've done as a city, and I can't miss the opportunity to say, we flattened this curve in the spring. We did an amazing job, and we're kind of falling off the wagon a bit. And I'll tell on myself, we ordered takeout from Superior Grill both Friday and Saturday night this weekend. And each time we showed up, it was full. I mean, it was like any other night of the year, packed, right? And my partner and I were both like, what's going on? Are we just out of the loop here? Why are all these people out sitting right next to each other? And I think we're seeing collectively, this has just gone on so much longer than anybody thought. And we are not doing a good enough job, continuing to mask up, continuing to follow protocols so that we can get kids safely back to school. And I think that's where we need to do a better job right now as a city.
Yeah. Thanks, Liz. Jamar.
Definitely. I look at the COVID pandemic as an unfortunate point in time. When I understand Katrina, it was one point in time that we went through another unfortunate situation. So for me, I'm hopeful but not satisfied. When I look at the last 15 years, I was hopeful that we'd be a lot farther along than where we are now. And I'm not satisfied at the progress that we've actually made, but still looking at the inequities that this pandemic has revealed once again, shows me once again that I'm hopeful, and based on what I see from our families and our students. I'm hopeful based on what I see from the educators. I'm hopeful based on what I see being generated in our schools and support programs like what Liz is doing and Ms. Allison's in her classroom. But I'm still not satisfied because we have a very long way to go. And until I see poverty numbers go down, until I see the inequities decrease, until I see empowerment of our youth where they're actually able to change the trajectory of their life and crime rates go down, I'll never be satisfied with what's happening in our city of New Orleans. And it's just a long road to actually have to haul. There's a lot of work that all of us have to do. And I do think we can get there, hopefully, for our next 15 years.
I appreciate that, and the kind of the big picture sweep going back to Katrina. How about just in how the schools responded to COVID?
I still say resilient. I think the schools, the leadership in the schools, the leadership in the various different organizations, when they saw the need, they rose to the occasion, and that's all that we can ask for. Although we still are working through it, we're still willing to do the work. So I'm still hopeful. that we can facilitate and our students will actually start. But just seeing us at this point in time, I go back to the initial word, our leadership in our schools and our faculty and our students have been very resilient during this time.
All right, thanks, Jamar. Derek.
Yes, sir. Once again, thank you all for allowing me to be a part of this panel. I've learned so much, and it's been exciting to hear all the comments. I often say that, tell my people here that there's only one way to eat an elephant, and that's one bite at a time. This is a massive undertaking. When we look at the big picture, we'll never be able to, we feel like overwhelmed that we'll never be able to get it, but we have to start taking pieces of it at a time and not thinking that we have to do it alone. As Ms. Jackson stated, and I've been saying all along, it's going to take this entire village. We're going to have to all bring our expertise to the table and help one another in order to help our kids, our families, which is ultimately going to continue to grow our community. I must say I'm excited to be a part of this Algiers family, the NOLA PS family, simply because, like you said, Ms. Williams, they are on the cutting edge. I've worked in St. Mary Parish, I've worked in Concordia Parish, I have kids in Lincoln Parish, I have friends in Washita and Monroe area. What we're doing here is exciting on this magnitude. But as a father myself, I must say that I have to think about my child's safety as well. And so if all of these kids are our kids, we have to think about them as our kids likewise. If we've been charged with that responsibility, we must remember that there's going to be some tough decisions that we have to make. And it may not be the one that everyone wants. And I tell you this little story about my mom. I didn't drink milk as a kid. I never have. The doctor she told me that the doctor said I can have ice cream in moderation. I tell you to this day, I love ice cream. So I would eat ice cream all day long. But my mother and my father would not allow that. As parents, as the person in charge, as the people who've been charged to educate our kids, we have to make those decisions. Even if that's what you want, even if I know that this kid should be in school, I know we have to find other ways to still reach that goal. I thank you all for having me on here. I appreciate the time today.
Thanks, Derek. Marcella.
Thank you also for having me on this panel. I appreciate everything that everyone brings to the table, so much experience and insight and, just heart for the concern of the people. I am glad that we have taken the safety of our students and faculty and administrators and auxiliary workers as our number one priority. What concerns me is that we be consistent and the decisions that we make going forward, we are able to support and sustain. What I've seen across other systems is, a call for in-person learning, and then 2 weeks later, they have to shut down the schools. This kind of instability and inconsistency will not be of help to our students. And what I hope that we have learned from this or are learning from this is that even when I prayerfully say when we get this virus under control, that we don't lose the lessons of the hour and that we don't revert to the way that we were, but that we find ways to move forward in what a community needs to become for a society to grow rich and talented, young, Black, brown, white, yellow, our whole communities. We need to uplift our community, and we all have to work together. We cannot go back to business as usual. If there's anything that I've learned is how important it is to educate a people. A people need to be educated because this is the way that we can make progress. This is the way that we can learn to live with each other, that we can drop the crime rate, that we can be good neighbors, that we can lift neighborhoods, lift communities, and lift our city. And we all have to do our part. So, you know, there's no break that any of us can take. This is a work that we need to do to the grave.
Thank you so much, Marcella. That's a great, inspiring way to end. And I want to thank everybody for being on the panel. This is really a great group, and I think the city is lucky to have all of you. I always like to say that I'm directing research centers, that my job is really easy. Your job as educators is a hard one, and especially now. So I appreciate your efforts, and I think the citizens of New Orleans, the children of New Orleans, are lucky to have you. Just as a couple of quick follow-ups, we've got another panel coming up next week regarding the anniversary, or connected to the anniversary of Katrina, that you can find on our website. It's now there on the bottom of the screen. We'll be also releasing some additional reports. I mentioned the one report from our sister center, the Reach Center, about how schools responded nationally, that you can find on that website. It's if you just search Reach Center Ed as the website for that. We'll also be doing some and are working on analyses now, looking back at what happened to students who were in school at the time of Katrina, and trying to understand how that crisis affected them, partly as a way of better understanding how this crisis might be affecting students and affecting different groups of students in different ways. So we're trying to do our part as well for the city to help address the crisis. So thanks again for everybody here and everybody in attendance, and hope to see you again here online, or better yet, in person soon. Take care.